All right, welcome back to our live Conversations on a Bench. It is almost mid-morning, and we are going to make it. I just know it. I'm joined with two people that I'm really, really excited to talk to. First, I have Henrika McCoy, who is the Dean of the Graduate School of Social Work at Denver University, and joining her is Daniel Brisson, who is a professor at the university as well, and he is the Director of the Center for Housing and Homelessness Research. So Henrika and I have been saying that Daniel's the expert, so we might just read a book or something while he tells us what we need to know, right? Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for having us.
Sure, it's great to be here.
Yeah, so glad, so excited that you guys could come. One of the things that we're really interested in is this Conversations on the Bench. One of our big goals is to raise awareness because a lot of people have opinions about homelessness and they see homelessness, but they may not necessarily understand what it's like to be homeless, what the causes are of homelessness, things like that. So I'm curious, from your perspectives, what are some of the day-to-day challenges that we see people experiencing homelessness struggle with that maybe we don't ever struggle with?
So thank you for having us. Yeah. I'm going to start, but then I'll pass it off on to Dr. Brisson.
To the expert?
Right. I'll just say I'm new to the Graduate School of Social Work, and the University of Denver is very lucky to have Dr. Brisson because his interest and focus on homelessness and housing is really kind of unique.
Yeah.
You ask kind of what are the things that people don't realize. I think people often forget that people who are living without housing are people.
Yes.
I was driving in this morning and I passed a gentleman on the side of the road with a sign and clearly with all of his belongings. And my first thought was, ironically, I'm driving here as opposed to having the opportunity perhaps to interact with him. And I think people often don't understand that so many of us are just a one step away from living without homes.
Right.
And that particularly in our increasing change of our society, that it only takes one thing. It takes a loss of a job. It takes a loss of medical insurance, a loss of someone who's your financial support. Living here and being undocumented and having been safe for a long period of time and now feeling the need to flee. And so people have an idea, I think, that people without housing are choosing not to or not working hard enough, as opposed to understanding the real structural inequities in our society that lead to the outcome. It could be mental health challenges. It could be someone who was incarcerated, who has now been successful and been able to re-enter, but find themselves without what society has promised. Right? When you're incarcerated, it should be that you've, quote unquote, paid your debt to society, yet you return and those things are still held against you.
Right.
So I think there's so many factors that people fail to recognize because they feel that they're safe, yet most of us are not.
Yes. Wow. That was powerful.
No, thank you.
Daniel, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I love Dean McCoy's response, and I agree with, all of it, and that very first thing, like why do I and many of us fail to see someone living without a home as another person? I do it, right? I think we all do, and I think elevating that is one of the first things. But I guess the one thing I would want to add, and I was lucky enough to do a study in the Tri-Cities of Sheridan, Englewood, and Littleton, where they were trying to understand the causes and consequences of homelessness in their Tri-Cities area. And so we conducted a number of interviews. It's been a few years, but I believe it was 200 interviews in total back then. And the themes from those interviews, we like to say, frankly, mental health and substance use, and I say that too, and maybe I don't say it a ton, but it's clear when we're talking to people and anecdotally. But what we found in that study was the primary cause that people that people experiencing homelessness noted, and what I don't think people realize is the primary cause was about relationships.
Yes,
and it's a relationship issue,
and
challenges with relationships, hurt, pain from relationships, probably the most important thing to all of us, right? Our social standing and our social relationships with other people. But the people that we're failing to see, they're hurting. And probably, and for many, many, many of them, they're hurting because of the relationships that have caused them some pain.
Yeah, I resonate with that so much. I remember reading a quote once that said, people don't become homeless because of a lack of money, at least not right away. People become homeless because of a lack of relationship. And as over the years I've thought about that and been doing this work, I thought, that's so true. And here's my evidence for that, right? If one of those things, Dean, that you talked about happens to one of us here on the bench, and suddenly we find ourselves losing our home, I highly doubt that any of the three of us would end up at Denver Rescue Mission or under a bridge. And why? Because we have the relationships, the support networks. It might be family, it might be a church community, it might be, neighboring community, whatever it might be. But we have those relationships that people aren't going to let us get to this point. So if you don't have those relationships, then this is where you end up, right? And once you, I'm sure as you guys know, once you get to a point where you are in shelter or on the streets, it is extremely hard. It's a hard journey out. So I totally resonate with that. I am curious, Daniel, what made you decide to become an expert in this field?
It's an interesting question, and I'm a little shy to say it because it wasn't my plan. I'm really interested in neighborhoods, and my interest in neighborhoods, and particularly neighborhoods with high percentage of people living below the poverty line. We might just refer to them as high poverty neighborhoods or low income neighborhoods. I love, and so that led to an interest in housing, and particularly how, the preponderance of housing that's subsidized in those neighborhoods, and then. Just the other side of housing is, if we're living in the most affordable housing in the most affordable neighborhood and something goes wrong, what happens? Well, we are housing insecure. Well, we're already housing insecure, but we may experience homelessness, and that's where my interest started, and I guess I paused there trying to make that connection even just a little bit stronger. That's it, right? If you're in the most affordable house in the most affordable neighborhood, where do you go when that housing goes away because of gentrification, because of some redevelopment, a current issue or a current thing that I'm thinking about, because that house doesn't pass inspection for a housing choice voucher anymore? Well. That's it. You got the last thing available.
Yes.
Or someone else needed to move in, and you're only allowed to have so many people, and you were helping someone else.
Yep.
Your landlord finds out.
And now you're all on the street.
Yeah. And so essentially just trying to connect that housing and homelessness issue a little more tightly, which I think is connected for many people, but sometimes, at least in my research field, and probably, Dennis, in your field a little bit, can feel a little siloed, and I wish we could connect them a little more instead of playing this zero-sum game. You're either in homelessness or you're in housing. Yeah,
well said, exactly. So how can, or maybe a better way to say that is, how should an understanding of the impact of trauma on the brain and brain development, and that we know that is a factor in housing instability. So how should that define or design, or how should it impact, I guess, the way we design services, particularly for youth experiencing homelessness?
So I'll talk about youth, but this is right up his alley. So
look at us.
So my experience was as a clinician, and I really focused on particularly young black boys who had mental health issues that precipitated their involvement in the legal system. And why that's important is they really represent a large group, as for many of us in our society, who have experienced trauma, and trauma that goes underdiagnosed, misdiagnosed, ignored, etc. And often they are in families that have also experienced trauma. And they're a subset of the population that many of us, if we look around just who we know, right, there's a lot of trauma that happens in our society. And we are in the midst of seeing trauma happening currently every day to everyday people. I'm from Chicago. And I am unfortunately constantly watching videos right now, what's happening on the streets in Chicago of everyday people with power, including aldermen, et cetera, being assaulted on the street, right? And so you have trauma that is primary, trauma that is secondary, vicarious trauma, all of this. And I think related to youth, it's really hard when you are living in an environment where trauma becomes quote unquote normalized, but it's not ever normal. Early in my career, my research focused on school shootings. And I was really interested in school shootings versus shootings at school. And the difference was shootings at school were the shootings that we often saw in urban neighborhoods, where there was a kind of a targeted shooting of a young person and no one cared. No one thought that therapy was important. No one thought the community might be traumatized by that. Versus school shootings at that time, really early, Columbine, I'm sitting here in Colorado, where there were this period of time where there were a lot of school shootings and resources rushed into the community. Everyone was traumatized about this and not understanding kind of the everyday trauma that happens.
Yeah.
And I bring up that experience because youth in particular in our long-term history in this country have experienced trauma for different ways. And often the housing that they're experiencing either continues to reinforce that trauma or continues to make that trauma possible. And so for youth in particular, it's really, we have to understand people are adolescents till they're 24. I know we live in a society when you can, buy cigarettes and go to war, et cetera, but the brain is still developing. And when we impact young people at an early age, what we do is imprint on their brain what that looks like and then how they engage. And so when they go out into the world and get a job, et cetera, and aren't successful, it's often because of what we ignored or didn't deal with early on in their age. But you've got...
Well, I have two responses. I feel like I've been long-winded, so I think
No, this is great.
So I think I'm going to try to be shorter, but we did, at our center, we conducted a really important study on the correlation between traumatic brain injury, which is different than trauma, right? Traumatic brain injury and homelessness, and found certainly a strong correlation between traumatic brain injury and homelessness. And in Denver here, we have permanent supportive housing for people who have experienced traumatic brain injury, and I wouldn't say the housing is for and as a result, but we do know it's a real big risk factor for experiencing homelessness. And then I think the conversation has been about trauma in general, right? And that's a trauma that research would say just about all of us experience, right? And I think the language comes from the ACEs survey from research, the Adverse Childhood Experiences checklist, and most of us would find some experiences of trauma. And I have a great relationship, and frankly, it's my primary partner right now with Shopworks Architecture. Who
we use Shopworks.
Shopworks Architecture develops what we used to call as trauma-informed permanent supportive housing or trauma-informed design. We've over the last year or two, we've constantly iterated on our model of what's going on for folks, and now we call this dignified design, more from a salutogenic, from a health focus rather than a deficit focus. But I would just invite anyone listening to go to Shopworks Architecture, trauma-informed design website to see all our latest thinking on how you design, considering the voice, considering the experience of someone who's gone through trauma rather than through the developer or the construction worker's perspective on what design need to happen. Let's elevate, let's prioritize the voice of people with an experience of trauma and put into the design of their housing what they need.
Yeah, that's so great. And we were talking in a session earlier this morning about we just broke ground on a new facility up in Fort Collins, and it's a homeless resolution center. And Shopworks designed it, and we were talking about just that importance of that trauma-informed design. And it's things that we don't think about, right? But those of us that have the responsibility and the blessing to serve the people that we serve, we need to think about it, and we need to make sure that we are designing things that don't do harm, and they actually produce spaces of healing and where people can move forward. So on this question, how does racial inequity factor into the issue of homelessness, and what are some of the key considerations for creating awareness campaigns that are sensitive to these disparities and address them?
Well, that we could spend the 24 hours discussing that one.
Yeah.
You know, it is a big question, because I think the fact is racial inequity permeates our society.
Mm-hmm.
And regardless of what aspect you're looking at, you will often find it's the same thing. We live in a society increasingly that wants to move back to a colorblind approach. When I first became a social worker, the colorblind approach was all the rage. And I was thrilled that we moved away from that. And when I say colorblind, what do I mean? It's that, race and ethnicity don't matter, we're all human.
Right.
But the fact is that is not true in this society, at least in this country, and I would dare say globally. Yeah. Race and ethnicity defines your access to opportunity, your experiences with trauma, your experiences with how you are perceived, how you perceive yourself, how you engage with others, etc. And what that means is how you then experience access to housing is the same, and it means how you experience living without housing is not the same, and that the nuances of that can be related to how you feel about yourself. Do you think you are worthy to have housing? Do you not think that? And do those who are providers think that as well? And how, when you approach seeking shelter, how people then respond to you. You know, if you are someone walking down the street and you're living with housing, does someone see you not just as someone who's living without housing, which is enough,
right,
but then add on your race or ethnicity and then attach to it additional reasons for why that is, and increase responsibility that may not be any different than anyone else. Do you want to add in?
Yeah, I'll just first I'll confirm that the disparity exists here in Denver as well.
Right.
That there's a disproportional number of people who identify as Black experiencing homelessness compared to what we would expect from the general population. And another project I've worked on, the Denver Basic Income Project, we were really, really purposeful about trying to address that in the services we provide, unconditional cash for people experiencing homelessness. And the main factor we landed on to help address it, and just continuing to emphasize what I heard Dean McCoy say, is that people of color may not feel comfortable, may not feel comfortable. That's still putting it on the person, right?
They're not welcomed.
Yeah,
They're
the
institution,
right? The institutions and systems, including mine, the Center for Housing and Homelessness Research. And Dennis, I don't want to throw your organization in there as well, but most of our organizations and systems are built for historically around things that are white, right? And so those systems are still serving and providing some leaning, some access towards a culture from the 60s and 70s and 80s. And we're still learning how to build systems, organizations, institutions that serve everyone equitably. And yes, we need to continue to work on that to address disparities that we do see in the experience of homelessness here in Denver.
And I think what I want to add on to that is oftentimes organizations want to be helpful. I mean, I'm at the University of Denver, where, you know, they're interested in being Denver's university. But what people often miss is the history of what that means. So you can want to be a partner, but if you don't change how people perceive you, you will not be a partner. Right? So how do you open your doors and understand that those who you're interested in partnering with are the experts on their experience, and understand from them what they need for them to be able to access the opportunity that you say that you want to offer. And so race and ethnicity are a big driver there. Gender can be for other reasons, right? So how do you understand from someone else's perspective? You do that by remembering they're the expert, not you. And you need them to guide your decision making, and by not pretending like race and ethnicity are not a factor. I mean, for many of us, it is the driving factor. I had a class once, and when I was in school, and the person said, you know, we're going to look it through this whatever lens, and I said, I'm a black woman, but I have to tell you, for me, race is the driving factor.
Yeah.
Not that I don't
Yeah.
understand how gender impacts, but even if I were a man, race would still be an issue.
Yeah.
And so for many people, that is true. That's not for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
but it's for enough people that has to be included in the equation.
I think you're right, and I'm a fellow Midwesterner, so Michigan is my home state. I have a son that lives in Chicago, so I share your concern. But when I entered into this space 14 years ago, one of the first things that I heard people talking about was sort of this racial inequity and things like that. And because of where I grew up and things like that, I was like skeptical. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the best pieces of advice that I got from somebody that was working at the same organization as me is exactly what you're talking about. He said, sit down and talk to people. But he said, actually don't talk. He's like, sit down and ask a question and listen. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I need to do. And the more I did that, the more stories that I heard that, just these on the ground stories, it was impossible to think that this isn't an issue, right? I can remember sitting on the step in front of the rescue mission that I was leading at the time, with an African American male, and he and his family were in our shelter, and they were there because he lost his business. And when he lost his business, he lost income, and they lost housing, and they didn't have the other social supports. Mm-hmm. So they ended up where they never wanted to be in the mission. So as I'm talking to him and I'm saying, well, tell me about your business and tell me about, what happened for you to lose your business. It boiled down to something really simple and really terrifying. And that was, he said, I couldn't get a loan that a lot of other people, or he even looked, he's like, that you could have gotten.
Right.
And, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to believe that, right? Because now you're messing with the way I see the world. And, but the more I heard those stories, the more it was undeniable. Right. I talked to another guy who was in a biracial marriage, and they went to sign a contract at a bank, and his wife was white, and she was treated very differently than he was. They were suspect of his ID, and this didn't happen in 1962. Right. This happened in 2020, or before COVID. But so now I'm being a little long-winded, but just to, I suspect there will be people watching this now or that might watch it later that are like, no, I don't know, and it's like, no, but it's true, right? And the only way people are going to understand that is to listen.
Right. And there's such a cycle. I mean, you
and
talk
to be
about
curious.
Right, his inability to get a loan, or how the other gentleman, his wife, was treated better. Credit unworthiness in our society is impacted by race and ethnicity.
Yes.
People assume that your inability to do something is based purely on a credit score. Mm-hmm. But that credit score often develops because you were given a higher interest loan.
Right.
And then your employment you're underemployed. Yep. So then it becomes a cycle of your inability to pay. Not because you borrowed more than you could, it's because that's what you were offered, which leads into a cycle, which often for some people, unfortunately, leads to being without a home. And so it's embedded in every single aspect, whether people are able or wanting to understand that or not.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, question for you guys: given your background, both of your backgrounds in academic research, social work, what do you believe is the single most important element in a successful awareness campaign for homelessness? Something that moves the public even beyond that awareness that we're trying to raise, but to tangible action as a community.
Wow.
I know. That's not an easy one.
I think finding a way to communicate to people how each person is just a step away. And I don't know what that looks like, but I do know that many people just choose to look away, either because it seems irrelevant, it seems impossible. But I believe when people realize how close they are, perhaps that might be the piece that wakes you up. It's like when you have lived your whole life and never had a relationship with anyone who got cancer, and then all of a sudden they have it, or you have it, and then your whole world changes in that moment of a diagnosis, right? Or you've lived your whole life and been fortunate to not have someone close to you pass away. The minute that happens, your entire perspective changes.
It does.
And I think particularly as we get older, we find people who experience that more and more, and then they come back and say to you, I didn't understand.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
know. If I had known, I would have done X,
Yeah.
Y, and Z. And so I don't know how you communicate that broadly to people, but I think on some level, if every person saw themselves one step away,
Right.
and then what it looked like,
Yeah.
then perhaps that might be a strategy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Because I've been so long-winded, can I just go with I don't know? I thought about it before. I've been confronted with it before.
Yeah.
And really, I don't know. And I lean into my skill set, which is as a researcher and a social scientist, and try to contribute in that way. But I will take a shot at it after leading with my real answer, which is I don't know. I mean, it probably changes day to day, year to year. And right now, if this feels a little bolder than it's probably going to sound to your audience, but I just think I'm leaning into what you said, listening.
Yeah.
Listening to people that are different than you, finding commonality might be where I'm leaning right now in terms of connecting with others and helping others, growing for myself, and then helping others grow as well.
Yeah. And you know, picking up on the listening thing, back in Michigan, I had the blessing of, for about 12 years, I was an adjunct faculty member at the university I graduated from, and I was able to teach in the adult degree completion program. And one of the classes that I taught was called Current Social Issues. And I loved it because the textbook was rewritten every 2 years.
Right.
And it looked at the current social issues, right? And it did a great job at it. But what I really loved about teaching that class is exactly what we're talking about, is the class was very diverse. And people came in with their own stereotypes, their own judgments, their own baggage. And you know, I can remember during the George Floyd episode in our country, and I was teaching that class at that time, and there were some people that looked like me in the class, and they just didn't get it.
Right.
And to their credit, they admitted they didn't get it. But then there were, you know, people from the African American community that were there that said, well, let's talk about it. And then, you know, I can remember throwing out the syllabus for that day,
Right.
and just facilitating this discussion. And what happened is, two things happened at the end of that class. Number one is everyone in that class learned, right? Everyone in that class learned. And the second thing that happened is relationships were forged. And I think, you know, even what we're doing with Conversations on the Bench, we're having discussions that I'm hoping are causing people to wonder, to be curious, to learn. You know, if there's somebody that's watching this that still doesn't quite buy what we're talking about, I think the best advice is talk to somebody.
Right.
Talk to somebody that's different than you. Ask them about their lived experience.
Right.
And try to listen to them without sitting in judgment.
Right. What's interesting, this is not about this topic in particular, but just what you say related to listening. My program where I got my undergrad and graduate degree has a very strong alumni association there in Missouri. And they do events around the country. And the director of the social work program at Colorado State is also a graduate of our program.
Okay.
And she and I were in the same cohort. And so the new dean there, who we're friends with, came to Colorado and came to Denver last year, and we had a fireside chat. So she facilitated the conversation between the two of us. And it was about some broader social issues. But the reason I bring it up is there was a gentleman in the audience, and he said, you know, I'm not a social worker. In fact, I'm a former chair of a political party. And I came because I was curious.
Yeah.
Because I really wanted to know what is the big deal, right? And I knew that this audience would have probably significantly different political beliefs, but I wanted to listen and learn.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you because I learned a lot.
Wow.
And so I bring that up because the example that you gave, which is being open to listening
Yeah.
and then wanting to learn and just
Yeah.
taking a step back. And he offered himself up for an
Yeah.
hour and a half of
Yeah.
mingling with other people, many of them a lot younger, who were all across different disciplines, but listening to these three social workers who are in
Right.
academic positions, but talk about these social issues,
Yeah.
and being able to walk away and say, thank you, I learned, and
Yeah.
you've given me a lot to
Yeah.
think about it. And
Yeah.
that's the key, putting yourself in the position to wanting to learn,
Yes.
being open to learning, and then acknowledging
Mhm.
that you got a kernel out of it and you want to
Yeah.
take it back and share and think about it.
Yeah. And maybe if even if you do that and you learn, and maybe even if it doesn't change some of your beliefs, you will still be better for it, and the community is better for it, right? Because at least you'll be more informed and have a better understanding of people that view things or experience things differently than what you do. So you mentioned youth. So I was sharing with some of the other people that we were having conversations with that one of the things that gives me hope is, we have almost 400 staff at Denver Rescue Mission.
Wow.
And the majority of them are way younger than me, right? The majority of them are probably like 35 and under. And I think every generation looks at the generations behind them and says, those kids. But what I see here in the staff that are working here, that are in the emerging generations, is passion, is conviction, is compassion, and it makes me feel really good about our future. So with you guys being in higher education, I'll just leave that there and see how you respond to it.
Well, it is interesting when you're in academia, and we're a graduate program only, so we don't have undergraduate students. But they can be young. They can start at 20 and go up, and it could be a second career or third career. And the passion that you talk about, I think, exists in youth, and it certainly it exists in social work. I mean, I think one of the smartest decisions I ever made was to be a social worker.
Wow.
It's probably I live my life with very few regrets, but that is one I certainly don't regret.
Right.
And it is because even if you don't agree with the person next to you, the level of passion and commitment exists.
Yes.
And so when you talk about young people, they are coming into a field where I think most people still have that passion about the work that they do, and it invigorates their passion.
Yeah.
And it's something I think that really is a thread that continues throughout the profession. And so the passion that they bring is about many of the same issues. I mean, so the goal of social work is to not have a job.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in my lifetime, we'll never work our way. We'll never work our way out of a job in my lifetime. But I love the fact that they come with different ideas about how to attack an issue, or the same ideas that they think are unique. And in fact, you can say, well, when I started this 30 years ago, I had the same idea.
That's not a new idea.
But I'm happy to see that you still care enough to have that passion.
Yeah.
So
I'm
not in the classroom anymore. So
so somebody in the classroom.
Well,
there we go.
I don't know. Some of my thought goes to my 16 and 17-year-old who are high schoolers, and I think I'm thinking about a particular class that I'm teaching right now, and I think and I don't know. I think, again, it's my answer for a lot of things, and maybe there's a reason for that, because I go into the classroom thinking about what I need to do, how I need to be responsible, what I need to teach, and that's probably my worst teaching day. And then when I go into the classroom thinking, what can I learn? How can I listen to them? How can I pay more attention to what they need and respond to them? I learn things all the time.
Yes.
And so I don't know what it is about this generation. I might go to phones or ubiquitous information. I don't know what that is, but boy, they are good. And if when I stop believing that I need to do something, or that I have the answer or have to have the answer, and listen to their answer, I am very surprised at how ignorant I was that I thought I was going to do something when it's actually them that have the answers.
Let me just chime in for a brief second to say Dr. Brisson is being a little humble, because we had two faculty members who were identified this year with distinguished teaching in the classroom, and he was one of them.
Wow.
And many of the comments I had the pleasure of sharing were about his openness and humility and willingness to share and listen and learn. So I appreciate his humility. However, it is humility. So
that's awesome.
Yes.
Well, we are nearing the end of our time, and as we were talking about off camera before this, we're three introverts sitting on a bench.
I'm going to my book.
I know. I think for three introverts, we did pretty well. And I haven't slept. So So yeah, I'm going to pat myself on the back. But Dean McCoy and Dr. Brisson, I'm just so grateful, first of all, that you would come here and sit on the bench with us, but also really grateful for the work that you're doing, and it's really important work. And we're partners, right? We're all working in this together, and it takes the entire community. So thank you for everything that you do, and thank you for coming to the bench.
Yes, thank you for having us, and thank you for all that you do.
All right.
Yeah, I want to say thank you too. Thanks so much, and thanks to the 400 people working for you, doing this really, really, really important work. So, so thank you.
Thank
and all
you
your,
on
all
behalf
your
of them. Thank you. Yeah. All right. So we are going to take a quick break, and then we will be back on the bench with our next conversation.